so thank you everyone for attending today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. I'd just like to give everyone a little bit of time to get settled in. Today's class is going to be mostly an introduction to the course. We're not going to get into any in-depth material today. Okay, so I'd like to thank you for being in attendance, whether that be right here in the classroom or if you're joining us virtually. Thank you so much. So I would like for you all to please take out your textbook. Okay. I'll give you just a minute. Okay. So if you weren't able to find your textbook available just yet, I do have a PowerPoint, some PowerPoint slides also that you can access right inside of the virtual classroom. Okay. So we will be in this class for the next 2 semesters. And what I would like for you to do right now is open up your books. Just need to flip through just a bit. We're looking for the contents page. So you will find first there is a section that is titled Brief Contents, and that is not the one that I would like for you to look at today. Just come over to the next page, and this is the main contents. So now basically today it's going to be just an introduction to what the course is going to be all about. I am going to be going over the contents pages of this book, which are basically our syllabus for the year, and we are going to follow all of these units in time order. So today I am going to just be going through all of the different topics that we will be discussing in this course. So basically I will be just reading, but I will give a little bit of an explanation where I can. And this will take just about our entire class for the day. We do have just under an hour. Okay, so that's basically all that we will be doing today. And if you have any questions, please write them down or try and remember. And we will have some question time at the end of the class, okay? So you can see, just flipping through the contents, there is quite a lot that we will be covering. And the content is divided into part 1 and part 2. And each part is divided up into different units as well. Okay, so let me just give you just a few minutes to prepare yourselves, and we will get started in just a minute. Okay? If you'd like to go and get yourself something to drink, because we will not be taking any breaks. So I think that we are ready to begin. Okay, so let's begin with part 1. And part 1 is titled Concepts and Techniques for Crafting and Executing Strategy. And I'd like to just compare that to part 2. Part 2 is going to be a little different. It will involve more practice for you. Part 2 is about cases in crafting and executing strategy. So you will be studying some real life businesses, and we will analyze their strategy, and we will have some exercises to help you to understand and analyze their strategies, okay? So, coming back to part 1, the first section, section A, is an introduction and overview. So first we're going to be talking about what exactly is strategy and why is it important. So this may seem like a pretty simple question. We all know what the word strategy means, but in terms of business and business strategy, there's a lot more detail. Okay, so a business strategy is an action plan just like any other strategy. However, it does have a specific desired outcome, and that outcome is to outperform competitors as well as to have profitability. Okay. So there are some specific choices involved with creating a business strategy. All right. Okay, so what do we mean by strategy? And that involves talking about strategy and the quest for competitive advantage. We'll also be taking a look at why a company's strategy evolves over time. And this section also gets into a company's strategy being partly proactive as well as partly reactive. Okay, so what exactly do we mean when we talk about proactive versus reactive? So when we talk about being proactive, this includes planned initiatives that are focused on the company's financial performance, but a business must always be prepared to change or modify those plans as needed as more of a reactive strategy to changing conditions in the environment. Okay, so we'll learn a little more detail when we get to that chapter. Okay. Then we're going to get into a company's strategy and its business model. So those go sort of hand in hand. Okay, so we will come to discuss how the business model is sort of what puts in place the reasoning behind how the strategy will come to be the success or the downfall of the business. Okay. So we will cover that in this section. Let's see. So next we'll talk about what makes a strategy a winner. And we'll talk about why crafting and executing strategy are important tasks. Okay, and then we will be looking at why exactly crafting and executing a strategy are important tasks. So that gets into having a good strategy, but the importance of the execution of that strategy, and that involves good management. Okay. And then we will talk about the road ahead. Okay. Now you will find at the end of each section is a helpful section called an illustration capsule, and that involves taking a brief look at a real company's business strategy, anything that is related to the topic that was discussed in the section. So for example, in this first section here, talking about what is strategy, we're going to take a look at McDonald's strategy in the quick service restaurant industry. And we will also be taking a very brief look at Sirius XM and its place in the over-the-air broadcast radio. Okay. So we'll talk about two contrasting business models. Okay, so then we're going to get into part 2 of section A, and that is titled Charting a Company's Direction, which involves its vision, its mission, objectives, as well as its strategy. Okay. So we're going to ask ourselves, what does the strategy making, strategy executing process entail? Okay, in this section we're going to have some tasks to help us to understand exactly what we mean when we ask this question. So our first task is going to be developing a strategic vision, a mission statement, and a set of core values. So that is all about our mission and our business plan. So first we need to develop a strategic vision. we need to communicate that vision. We need to develop the mission statement. And then we will talk about linking that vision and mission with the company's values. So task number 2, we will get into setting our objectives. Task number 3, crafting a strategy. So you'll notice they used the word crafting. So in this task, we're going to focus on strategy making and how it involves managers at all organizational levels. Okay, so excuse me just a moment here. And then we get into crafting the strategy, how the strategy making process involves managers at all organizational levels. Talks about the company's strategy making hierarchy. And lastly, the strategic vision, objectives, and strategy, which all combined leads us to a strategic plan. And then we have task 4, which will be the execution of the strategy. Task 5 will be about evaluating the performance and initiating corrective adjustments, which is always part of the process. And lastly here, we will get into corporate governance, specifically the role of the board of directors in the strategy crafting and strategy executing process. Okay, moving right along over to page 2. You can see the illustration capsule. In this section, we have 4 different examples here to illustrate the concepts of the chapter. Okay, we will talk a little closer about these when we get to that unit for the sake of our time today. And section B, we get into core concepts and analytical tools. Okay, so now we were on to section 3 of part 1. Okay, so in section B, we come down to unit 3, and that unit is titled Evaluating a Company's External Environment. Okay, so this is gets into the business's place in the environment that it exists in. Okay, so we're going to ask ourselves this question. What are the strategically relevant factors in the macro environment? Okay. We are going to assess the company's industry and competitive environment. Okay. And then another question here we're going to ask is, how strong are the industry's competitive forces? So it's a lot of analyzing and research. All right, and there's some different things to discuss specifically and how to better evaluate and answer that question, okay? We'll get into more detail when we get to this unit. We're also going to be asking ourselves what factors are driving industry change, what impact will they have? Okay, so that involves some different concepts here that are listed. We're not going to go over those today, but we will talk in detail about these things later on in the course. And then we come to question 4. We'll be asking, how are industry rivals positioned in the market? So we'll use some tools to learn how to better evaluate and answer that question. And then we have question 5. What strategic moves are rivals likely to make next? Okay, so you can see how this is all part of a business strategy. All of these questions we need to ask and attempt to answer and predict. Okay. So let's see, then we get to question 5. No. Then we come down to question 6. We will be asking, what are the industry's key factors? Question 7, is the industry outlook conducive to good profitability? Okay, so this is all basically before we even get started. So you will see how all of these questions will help us to create as well as to adapt and change our business strategies after researching and answering all of these questions. Okay, so then we have at the end of this unit another illustration capsule. Take a brief look at some real life situations here. Now we come over to Unit 4 of Section B. Yes, if you're looking at the slides, we are on slide 6 right now. Okay, so Unit 4, all about evaluating a company's resources, capabilities, and competitiveness. Alright, so this chapter we'll ask ourselves, how well is the company's present strategy working? Okay. Then question 2, what are the company's competitively important resources and capabilities? This is a pretty interesting section here. First, about identifying the company's resources, and then assessing the competitive power of a company's resources and capabilities. So lots of detail involved in business strategy, as you can see. Question 3, is the company able to seize market opportunities and nullify external threats? Okay, some questions we'll ask ourselves here. Question 4, are the company's cost structure and customer value proposition competitive? There's a lot to answer and some tools here that we will go over. We're going to ask ourselves, is the company competitively stronger or weaker than key rivals? Question 6 will be asking what strategic issues and problems merit front burner managerial attention. Okay, so this is an ongoing process for an up and running business. And then we have another illustration capsule. Okay. And now we move on to section C, which is crafting a strategy. And that brings us to chapter 5, which is the 5 generic competitive strategies. We will talk about low-cost provider strategies. Move on to the next page here. We will talk about broad differentiation strategies. You may not exactly understand what we're talking about here. We'll get a little more into that later on in the semester. Okay. Then we will focus on focused or market niche strategies. It's a little more specific to the business itself. And we will talk about a focused low-cost strategy as well as a focused differentiation strategy and the advantages and disadvantages of each of those. We will talk about the best cost provider strategies. And we will finally, in this chapter, we will discuss the contrasting features of the 5 generic competitive strategies. So it's basically a summary. Okay, then we have another illustration capsule. And then we will come to chapter 6. And chapter 6 is titled Strengthening a Company's Competitive Position. And that involves going on the offensive strategic options to improve a company's market position. Then we will get into defensive strategies, protecting market position and competitive advantage. We'll also talk about the importance of timing a company's offensive and defensive strategic moves. And then we will move on to strengthening a company's market position via its scope of operations. Finally, here we have horizontal merger and acquisition strategies. Okay. Let's see, how much more time do we have here? Okay. Got a little more time. Not sure we'll make it all here. Possibly. Alright, so we do have a lot to cover. Okay. Next, we will talk about vertical integration strategies. And that's something we will have to get a little more into when we get onto that unit and what it specifically means. We're going to talk about outsourcing strategies and narrowing the scope of operations, strategic alliances and partnerships. And then we will have our illustration capsule for this unit. Excuse me for just a moment. If you do want to take a quick, just a few minutes break, just about 2 minutes here. Just trying to see if I have these materials here that I can provide you guys with before class is over today. If I don't have them here, I will make sure that I have them available for you in the online class, alright? Because these are some new materials that we were going to be using this year. Alright, I do have these here. I have to make sure, though, that I have uploaded the link into the online classroom, so I will be sure to have those available for you ASAP. Okay. Let's see, we're moving on here. Okay. So now we can move on to Unit 7. And Unit 7 is titled Strategies for Competing in International Markets. Alright, and we will discuss why companies decide to enter foreign markets. So this may be something that not every business needs to consider. So it's specific to only certain companies here, but we still need to focus on it. We will discuss why competing across national borders makes strategy making more complex. Okay, so this is something that maybe a specialized staff member may need to be hired for this type of planning. We're going to have a few examples here that we can talk more about in detail at that time. And then we've got strategic options for entering and competing in international markets. We'll talk about export strategies, licensing strategies, franchising strategies, foreign subsidiary strategies, as well as alliance and joint venture strategies. And these are all things that evolve with time, so it's always going to be a continued effort. And then we move on to competing internationally, and there are 3 main strategic approaches, and we'll discuss that later on. Let's see, I think we are a little more than halfway through the course, so I think I'll just try and stick to the main concepts here. And then we move on to the quest for competitive advantage in the international arena. Okay, yes, we still have a few more pages here. Then we move on to profit sanctuaries and cross-border strategic moves. Okay, we may not even understand fully just yet what all of this means. Okay, but I promise you will by the end of the course. And then we'll talk about strategies for competing in the markets of developing countries. Okay. And let's see here, defending against global giants, strategies for local companies in developing countries. And then we have our illustration capsule. And some of the what brands or companies we'll talk about here is Solazymes, cross-border alliance with Unilever, Sephora, and Roquette. We'll talk about Yum brand. And there's a few different businesses here that you might recognize. But we'll discuss that later on. And now we move on to Unit 8, which is all about corporate strategy. So this is, what does crafting a diversification strategy entail? When business diversification becomes a consideration. We're getting into some nitty-gritty here. Building shareholder value. The ultimate justification for diversifying. Okay, so this is obviously a little more advanced subject. Approaches to diversifying the business lineup. These are topics that are more relevant to a mature business. Let's see, choosing the diversification path, related versus unrelated businesses. All right, back onto diversifying. So then we'll talk about both separately. Diversifying into related businesses as well as into unrelated businesses. We'll spend a small unit on each of those topics. Okay, and then we've got combination related, unrelated, diversification strategies, and evaluating the strategy of a diversified company. It gives you steps for evaluating the strategy. And then we move on to our illustration capsule, and this is a short one here. Okay, so then we will move on to Unit 9. Focuses on ethics, corporate social responsibility, environmental sustainability, and strategy. All right, so what do we mean by business ethics? Where do ethical standards come from? Are they universal or dependent on local norms? So there may be some different opinions on this topic. Okay, it's not always one rule fits for everyone. We've got how and why ethical standards impact the tasks of crafting and executing strategy. So this will be an interesting unit here. We'll probably have a lot of different opinions and discussion when this unit comes around. What are the drivers of unethical strategies and business behavior? Why should company strategies be ethical? Okay, the moral case for an ethical strategy and the business case for ethical strategies. So, okay. Let's see. Then we move on to strategy, corporate social responsibility, and environmental sustainability. Okay, we've got our illustration capsule here and some of the different companies that we will talk about are Apple, Novo Nordisk, as well as Burt's Bees. Okay, these are very well-known companies here. So you can see it's not really a surprise that they are our examples for this unit. And now we are on to section D, which is all about executing the strategy. And we'll talk about in Unit 10, building an organization capable of good strategy execution. And that has everything to do with framework and execution. Okay, staffing the organization, acquiring, developing, and strengthening key resources and capabilities, matching organizational structure to the strategy. Okay, how much time do we have here? Okay. And here we are with another illustration capsule. Okay, just a little left here. Alright, now we're on to Unit 11, which is all about managing internal operations. Okay. That's 11. So this unit will discuss allocating resources to the strategy execution effort, instituting policies and procedures that facilitate strategy execution, instituting best practices and employing process management tools, installing information and operating systems, and then we come down to using rewards and incentives to promote better strategy execution. So you may be recognizing some of these programs from places that possibly you may have worked in the past or that you work for right now, and you're normally on the receiving end of a lot of these programs. Okay, we're going to learn about behind the scenes. And then we move on to our illustration capsule. And some of the companies we'll look at is Whirlpool, and their the use of Six Sigma to promote operating excellence. And now Unit 12, we'll look at corporate culture and leadership. Okay, so this is all about instilling a corporate culture that is conducive to good strategy execution. So this involves all levels of the company. But it starts at the top, as we will learn. We come down to leading the strategy execution process, staying on top of how well things are going, mobilizing the effort for excellence in strategy execution, as well as leading the process of making corrective adjustments. And then we've got a final word on leading the process of crafting and executing strategy. And we have our final illustration capsule. Alright, so that is the end of part 1 of our course. And somewhere around the midway mark of our course, we will be moving on to part 2, which is focusing on cases in crafting and executing strategy. So we will take a closer look at some very specific examples of how all of the topics that we learned about in the first half of our course and how they apply in these specific real-world business situations. Okay, so we will have, let's see if we flip back. If you look back at the brief contents, you'll see a condensed list of all of the different businesses that we will be talking about. Okay, so let's see, part 2. Part 2, we will first be taking a look at these businesses with regard to crafting strategy in single business companies. Okay, so we're almost through here. I am going to just name some of these companies that we'll be talking about, and then I will see if there are any questions that you have for me, and then we'll be all done, okay? Okay, so for section A, crafting strategy, so we'll talk about Mystic Monk Coffee. We'll be talking about Costco Wholesale. We will talk about Harry Linsol's textbook decision, an ebook or a traditional college textbook. We'll talk about Sift Cupcake and Dessert Bar. Some of the companies. We will take a look at Under Armour, challenging Nike in sports apparel. Okay, Lululemon Athletica. Okay, this is all still part of section A. Crafting strategy, single business companies. Okay, we'll talk about Coach, okay, Tiffany's, Little Blue Box. Does it have any strategic significance? We will take a look at Panera Bread, Chipotle Mexican Grill. Okay, it's almost time for lunch, so it's going to get us nice and hungry. We'll take a look at Netflix. Let's see, Google, Apple. Also, this one is about the State Fair of Virginia. Not sure how much you know about this, but we'll learn about that a little later on. Eastman Kodak, the Nucor Corporation. We will take a look at 7-Eleven in Taiwan. So you can guess that this will be something discussed in the international strategies lesson. Okay, 7-Eleven, adaptation of convenience stores to a new market environment. And now, moving on to section B, this is all about crafting strategy in diversified companies. Okay, so we'll look at companies that are a little larger. This is talking about the Walt Disney Company, Kraft Foods, and only those two are listed for the diversified companies. In section C, we will be looking at companies and discussing implementing and executing strategy. So some of the companies in this section are Robinhood, Devil's Den, we've got Starbucks. Down here we've got Bayonne Packaging. Okay, and just a few more here. This is section D. And these companies we will be taking a look and focusing on strategy, ethics, and social responsibility. So some of the companies in this section: Rhino Sales, Hunting and Poaching, the Upper Big Branch Mine Disaster, as well as Frog's Leap Winery. Okay, so that will be the end of our course. Okay, so when we come to this point in the course, you will certainly find that you have a deeper understanding of strategy making, strategy crafting, as well as managing and adapting. And you will better be able to connect all of the concepts that we have discussed throughout the length of our course. You will be able to find and sort of identify all of these concepts inside of these real life circumstances, real life companies. Okay. Okay, so I know that is a lot. Okay. So that's all that we'll be doing today. Looks like we finished right on time. Okay. Okay, so does anyone have any questions for me? Okay. Well, it looks like we're all done for the day. Thank you so much for joining today. And again, if anyone has any questions or needs anything from me, you can always reach out. My email is in the virtual classroom, my contact numbers, and I usually respond pretty quickly. Alright, so everyone have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next class.